Anybody looking for Julius Caesar facts is bound to find something interesting along the way, namely, his extremely wild and kinky reputation for sex. The ancient Romans didn't have the same hang-ups about sex that many societies do today. Much of Julius Caesar's sex life was considered normal by their standards, but not all of it. Caesar had a few alleged preferences in his sexual relationships that made him the subject of mockery, some of which could even be connected to his death in the Senate. Though Caesar was far from the most depraved leader of Rome, his proclivities do seem a little at odds with the modern concept of him as a stoic, bold, and important leader. But even in the stories accepted as largely historically accurate, such as that of the relationship between Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, there's a hint of lasciviousness about them. Sex was clearly an important part of Roman life, and to Caesar, a leader of Rome, it was no different. Let's get into it. With rumors of Caesar's passiveness and his preferences sometimes veering outside accepted norms, some of Caesar's enemies began to use those claims against him. In addition to the allegations that Caesar was passive and weak-willed, people claimed that he got his power not through acceptable means, but by sleeping with people. Because one of his most famous relationships had taken place with King Nicomedes, it was simple for people to claim Caesar got something else out of his time with the king. But this wasn't necessarily a bad thing in ancient Rome. The two cultures were different from one another. Greece, too, believed in relationships with varying power dynamics where one party learned from another through sex as well as education. Caesar's reputation with women was legendary. It wasn't just the concubines, foreign leaders, and ladies of the evening he dallied with, but also the women he actually married. He married 3 different women over the course of his life, beginning with Cornelia, who died 7 years after giving birth to Caesar's only legitimate child, Julia. After Cornelia's death, he married Pompeia, whom he left in scandal after she was caught with a man disguised as a woman during the festival of Bona Dea. Calpurnia came third. She had a nightmare about Caesar's passing on the day he was targeted in the Senate. They had no children, though Caesar did father a child with Cleopatra during his marriage to Calpurnia. The affair Julius Caesar had with Cleopatra is the stuff of legend. At the time of their dalliance, the leadership of Rome and Egypt were in a feud, but Cleopatra, according to legend, had herself rolled up in a carpet, rug, or bag of linens to be delivered to Caesar directly. They entered into a relationship not long after, one that infuriated Ptolemy XIII, then ruler of Egypt. The feud continued, with both Caesar and Cleopatra's lives threatened, and along the way, Cleopatra became pregnant with Caesar's child. The two remained together until Caesar's death, with Cleopatra reportedly hiring 2 actors dressed as Castor and Pollux to light his funeral pyre to reinforce belief in his divinity. Though some of Caesar's affairs drew public ire, it wasn't because he was committing adultery. Marriages in ancient Rome weren't intended for love or happiness, and women were encouraged to look the other way when it came to infidelity, as long as it met certain standards of decency. Men were expected to only have affairs with unmarried women, sex workers, and men or boys over a certain age. Because Caesar's high-profile romance with Cleopatra involved a foreigner as well as a woman who was unmarried, it was less eyebrow-raising than it might have been. But the people of Rome were deeply suspicious of her, leading to some taking issue with the way that Caesar's romantic appetite was harming the country. It wasn't just Caesar's preferences that made people think of him as more womanly than other men of the time. In addition to cross-dressing, Caesar had certain mannerisms that marked him as different in a society that valued hypermasculinity. Cicero at one point said of Caesar, "I never would have thought that a man who scratches his head with one finger and has such exquisitely arranged hair could have ever overthrown the Roman state." When other political figures mocked him for his demeanor or actions, he didn't retaliate as expected. Rather than fighting back by one-upping the insult, as was the custom, he instead replied that there had been many powerful queens throughout history. What set Caesar apart for his day was not just that many of his mannerisms seemed effeminate for the time, but also that he didn't try to curb them to be more socially acceptable. Caesar's rumored relationship with King Nicomedes of Bithynia was not suspect because it was a relationship between two men, but because of the role that Caesar was said to play in it. Rome was a patriarchy, meaning that men were considered socially superior to women, and, as such, traits normally ascribed to women were considered lesser. As a result, to be penetrated was to fall into a feminine role. The rumor held that Caesar was the penetrated partner in his relationship with Nicomedes, and he became the subject of ridicule for it. According to Roman gossip writer Suetonius, the Gauls were said to sing, "Caesar may have conquered the Gauls, but Nicomedes conquered Caesar," referring to Caesar's passive sexual role. The intent of such an insult was to paint Caesar as less manly, and therefore less confident and powerful, two important characteristics in a leader, regardless of whether or not the relationship really occurred. Caesar's affairs were hardly secret. During a Senate meeting, Caesar received a letter said to be urgent. He tried to read it without attracting attention, but Cato demanded that he read it aloud. Caesar told him it was a letter from a mistress, but Cato thought that Caesar might be involved in some kind of conspiracy. As it turned out, Caesar was telling the truth. Not only was it a love note, but it was also a love note from Servilia, Cato's half-sister. Caesar read the note before the Senate, disclosing his relationship with Servilia to all in attendance. Julius Caesar's appetite was said to be voracious. He was rumored to not be particularly choosy about partners, hence the rumors of him and King Nicomedes, as well as the numerous women he was said to be involved with. According to Suetonius, Curio referred to Caesar as every woman's man and every man's woman. It was meant to be an insult, though adultery wasn't frowned upon. The fact that Caesar participated in relationships with men in his fashion was. Among Caesar's rumored peculiarities, he was said to cross-dress, particularly during his time in the court of Nicomedes. Though he wasn't the only Roman politician to do so by a long shot, his other activities, while they led to rumors that his interests were unconventional. More specifically, the rumors held that he enjoyed being penetrated, the act of which went against acceptable male social behavior. Many of these rumors were recounted by Suetonius, a historical biographer and notorious gossip hound who detailed the lives of many Roman figures in detail. Though much of his writing has been debated as propaganda spouted by a political enemy of the regime, there is a substantial amount of corroboration in other Roman writings from the period, lending some credence to things like Caesar's purported cross-dressing. According to Suetonius, Caesar had a remarkable appetite for love. He was said to have slept with a number of queens, various noble women, and sex workers. His tastes weren't discriminating. He was seen with people of high social standing and low, and was willing to spend mass amounts of money on them. He bought Servilia a pearl costing 6 million sesterces, more than the value of a seaside villa in Naples. But that wasn't all. According to Suetonius, he slept with married women and ladies of the evening that he paid for with Roman money. As people were said to say of him, "Watch well your wives, ye cits, we bring a blade, a bald pate master of the wenching trade. Thy gold was spent on many a Gallic exhausted now, thou comest to borrow more." Caesar adopted his great-nephew Octavian through his will. Mark Antony, who had taken charge of Caesar's inheritance after his passing, was furious. He had believed that Caesar left his money and assets to him, not Octavian. Antony was so incensed that he argued Octavian must have exchanged romantic favors with Caesar in exchange for his adoption. Like his adopted father, Octavian was also prone to gossip, and though the accused relationship with Caesar was likely untrue, that Antony tried it at all support Caesar's reputation as a man with appetites that went beyond decency for the time. Which one is the most wild fact? Drop your comments below. Be sure to like and